back again. I'm the director of Pima Animal Care Center in Tucson, Arizona. I want to tell you a story about why I think foster is the future. In 2013, I worked at Fairfax County Animal Shelter in Fairfax, Virginia, and we had a breed restrictive adoption policy, so about 90% of dogs identified as pit bull dogs died. And you couldn't adopt a pit bull dog if in order to adopt a pit bull, you had to be 25, own a home, undergo a background check, agree to a mandatory home visit, agree to mandatory training, and have an 8-foot fence. So as you can imagine, it took anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks to adopt a pit bull dog, and most people just chose to adopt every other dog in the shelter. In our first year, I worked working with Tawny Hammond and Leanne Schenefeld, who hopefully are here in the room somewhere. We overturned that restriction, but we were working under a police department. Very, very conservative decision making. Are any of you working in agencies where the risk and liability issues are talked about a lot and you're worried to make decisions because of risk and liability? So that was still a really huge conversation, but we were still doing temperament testing, and hopefully you have all stopped in-shelter behavior assessments, but even at the time they were still really common. And so we were temperament testing every dog. And we were being really cautious because we had just overturned this pit bull adoption restriction. So we had this one dog named Carmela, and she had been in the shelter for a while. She was one of our adoption event ambassadors. She would go out and meet everybody and say hi, and was super friendly with other dogs and people. Been in the shelter about 3 months, and we had a policy to retest. So you temperament tested and you retested. And we tested her initially, she was fine. We retested her, she started to kind of bite at that rubber hand. Have any of you used a rubber hand? The food bowl, that crazy stick the rubber hand in the food bowl thing. So we tested her a second time, she kind of bit at the hand. 3 months in, we tested her for maybe the 5th time, and she had decided that the hand was a toy that she would like to exuberantly attack and throw across the room. And the kennel manager at the time was staring at Tawny and I, and he was just shaking his head. He was like, "Can you not see this dog is attacking this rubber hand, and she has to be killed?" And so Tawny and I were like, well, this is the assessment. She attacked the hand. She needs to die. And we took her back to the euthanasia room and killed her. But it was this moment, or the moment of her death was a catalyst for everything that would come after it. Because we looked at each other and we knew that we had done something really morally wrong. We knew that this dog was friendly and wonderful and had been in the shelter kind of a long time, and we were subjecting her to this arbitrary test over and over again. And Tawny, I think, still probably has her collar, but we kept her collar, and she served as a catalyst to try to do better. And what doing better meant for us was getting healthy, adoptable pets out of the shelter so that they didn't sit there so long that they lost their minds. And we all are still losing animals for that reason. So this is when Kelly and Sheila come in. Kelly was actually a volunteer of ours, and she just came on board to try to help us save more dogs through foster care. Kelly and I worked by ourselves with a terrible Excel spreadsheet for 2 years. We would save dogs by sending them to foster homes, dogs that were going to die in our shelter that were euthanasia listed. We would send them to foster, and then we would get them adopted. But because we were working in such a conservative environment in terms of risk and decision making, we wanted to make sure that we weren't creating additional safety risks. So over a 2-year period, we sent more than 50 youth-listed dogs to foster homes. And we thought these were dogs that were going to die in the shelter, and we thought we might save 10% of them. At the end of the 2 years, we realized we had saved 92% of them just by sending them to regular old people. So I had the opportunity, I think it's the National Symposium, Canine Research Symposium, that's part of SAWA, which is now AWA. Somehow accidentally, they thought I was like a legitimate researcher and let me talk. to a crowd of about 500 people, and Maddie's Fund was in the room, and I think Shelly was there, hi Shelly, thank you, went back and told Maddie's folks about it, and that's how we found Sheila, who became interested in the work we were doing. And so since then, the whole world has changed, thanks to the support of Maddie's Funds, and all the work that Kelly, who now works for Maddie's Funds, and Sheila have done. We're seeing Foster transform the entire landscape of what we do. And we're currently putting 50% of our cats and about 35% of our dogs in foster, and that's with a population of 19,000 animals a year. We're seeing this replicated all over the country, and we offer these Maddie's apprenticeships where we get to teach other shelters how to do this work and do research projects with Sheila leading the way. One of the shelters that we've gotten to work with and help double their foster program is KC Pet Project. And KC was already a leader in no-kill life-saving sheltering, but they came on board and have worked closely with us, and now they've doubled their foster numbers. And what we're seeing is that foster truly is the future of animal sheltering. In 1909, Teddy Roosevelt issued a statement to the country and said, we're no longer housing kids in orphanages, we're going to house them in foster homes. And that one historical moment is probably why we don't have dozens of orphanages in US cities, and why most children who are temporarily houseless are living in foster homes. So we believe that foster is the future of this movement, and it's how the majority of animals in our care should be housed. This is the most you're going to hear from me this session, because these are the experts who have made foster care a reality across the entire US now. And so while my shelter sent 5,200 pets to foster last year, we have lots of other examples of shelters that are sending 3,000 or more pets to foster care with one coordinator. We have shelters that are sending 1,500 to 2,000 animals to foster care with 1 or 2 committed volunteers. This is the cheapest, most humane, most effective solution for housing the majority of your animals, and they're going to tell you why. So I'll turn it over to them to introduce themselves now. Kelly?
Hi, I'm Kelly Duer. I'm Maddie's Fund's foster care specialist.
I'm Sheila Segurson. I am a veterinary behaviorist, and I'm the director of research for Maddie's Fund.
And I'm Teresa Johnson. I'm the executive director at Kansas City Pet Project.
Okay, so Sheila, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and your sort of role with foster care over the last decade?
Yeah, for sure. So when I say my title and what I do, oftentimes I want to say first I'm a foster caregiver, because actually while I'm here at the conference, I'm fostering an Austin Pets Alive dog. And that's how I got started, and I'm guessing how a lot of you got started with fostering, is fostering animals myself. And I did that while working in shelters and trying to get behavior programs going and behavior modification programs going, and learning that I was always battling the environment, and dog after dog after dog that did poorly in the shelter, and then I'd take it home and foster it, because at the time there was no one else I had to help me, and I didn't know how to recruit them. And they would do, 99% of them would do wonderfully in the foster home. And I really learned, despite being a veterinary behaviorist, the most that I can do to help the animals in my care is not to do some fancy behavior modification plan, but to get them out of the shelter. And that's why I'm here today.
And Kelly, you started as a volunteer. So the secret that most people don't know about what Kelly and I did is that in that first year, like 16 of the 30 dogs we sent home actually went to Kelly's house. Because if something bad happened, we wanted them to go to Kelly. And Kelly, can you talk a little bit about what you learned during that first couple years of our work?
Absolutely. When I started out, it was like maybe right when you guys got on board in Fairfax, and I saw like right there in the first few days how the culture that had been at the shelter was that if the dog gave whale eye or if they bit someone, it was seen as really, aberrant behavior, that and the dog was, in the beginning was put down, and it hit me that like this is not real life. Like it was it was just so strange. When Kristen started the short-term foster program, we signed up to do a weekend foster, and there was a dog there named Mocha, and she had been there for 7 months, and she was just going nuts in the kennel. My daughter had been an intern at the shelter, and she was sitting around with some of the caretakers, and they were talking about Mocha. Well, she's really hard to take out, every time I talk, take her out, she's biting at the leash and da-da-da. I don't like her, what about you? What about you? I don't like her, and Annie says, well, my mom likes her. And they were like, well, your mom should just take her home. And she told me the story, and I was like, challenge accepted. What was awesome, we took her home, and Mocha was a normal dog. She had been there for 7 months, slowly deteriorating from shelter stress. And getting her out of the shelter was it was a completely different dog that we saw in our home. And what we saw over during the study period, and what I've continued to see, is that, dogs are so much more themselves in a home, and they can show you who they really are. And that's it.
Teresa, can you talk a little bit about the kenneling environment? And for those of you who are like dogs, when are we going to talk about cats? We're going to talk about cats. A lot of this emerged out of the inability to place dogs back into the community. So when we start out talking about dogs, it's because we didn't have that outcome option for behavioral dogs, where we do have that for cats, but cats are coming. So before that, though, Teresa, can you talk a little bit about what the kennel environment of the old KC Pet Project was, and what that meant for the dogs in your care?
Yeah, so we had an old facility that was built in 1972 that was an old warehouse that housed heavy equipment for when they built the football stadium for Kansas City. So then they put kennels in it and decided they would turn it into a shelter. So we had really old kennels that were it was the dog pound, and it was rows of kennels where dogs stared at each other across the aisle, and then several of the rows were what you call the quads, which were the double deckers. And so we had upper and lower kennels. Of course, all the dogs stared at one another, but you had to lift every dog, and so those kennels, even though they were upper, they were pretty good size, and so you would have to put 80-pound pit bulls up in those upper kennels. And so we had the worst scenario, worst environment possible for dogs in our care. So yes, we had dogs came into our facility and were immediately stressed out. The arousal level was so high, and so it was really tough to even be able to tell what a temperament of a dog was just by looking in a kennel or walking down the aisle. Dogs were just barking constantly, and it was deafening in our old kennel. And you would walk up and down the aisles, and we did things like we tried to put up shower curtains, and we tried to put up barriers on the bottoms of kennels, and we tried all the things that we could, but that was really the toughest environment that I've ever seen anywhere. It was tough on staff, and certainly it was tough on dogs.
And so you guys bought into foster in a big way and have built an enormous foster program. And I think Kelly and Sheila, you've overseen places like KC Pet Project making this transition. What do you think it takes to make a transition from we're going to house most of the animals in the shelter to we're going to make foster? Like, what does the average shelter or rescue group have to do to make that shift?
They really just have to believe in it, first of all. The administration has to be really behind it and support it. In most shelters, at least traditionally in shelters, the only animals that go to foster are, neonatal kittens and medical needs pets. And sometimes there can be resistance to putting any other pets than those into foster. But if the administration believes in it and and talks to the staff about it, I think that is probably the biggest thing. The other thing is marketing. What PAC has shown us in the last 2 years is that you can recruit way more fosters from your community than you think you can. We have not even come close to the limits of figuring out how many fosters can be grown from one community.
Sheila?
So I definitely agree with what Kelly said, and I think in addition to believing in it, the other key piece is having at least one person who's really passionate about getting it off the ground, and then creating a culture at your organization where everybody, it's really hard, at least it was for me, to change my way of thinking because I'm doing everything I can for the pets, and it can be really hard mentally to come to the decision that you're doing your best, but it's still not the best for these animals. And so creating that culture where everybody understands that we're doing our best, but this animal would be happier in a home, and creating that culture so that everyone at your organization believes that, understands that, and is working towards the same goal.
Okay, so the elephant in the room whenever you talk about foster is liability. What do you say to folks who say, I really get it, I want to do it, but there's this liability issue if the foster animal does anything in the home that can come back on the organization? And any of you can answer that question.
So we take in nearly 6,000 dogs a year, and most of them are medium and large breed dogs. And last year we sent 1,100 dogs into foster. And 2,000 cats, so 3,100 animals. There are times when things do happen, but it's been a really small number. And so we do our best to support the foster homes and to help them with resources. We do provide behavior support and medical support, and the number of our foster coordinator, and also we've got a whole foster support system. We have a Facebook page that we use for our fosters, where it's a family, it's a community, and we have a lot of people on that page, but they all support one another. And so I think it's something that you consider, but we really don't. It's not a barrier at all to sending dogs into foster homes for us.
One other thing is your foster agreement. Definitely have it looked over by a lawyer to make sure that it's airtight. Mm-hmm. That's one of the most important things as well.
And the only other thing I would add is creating an environment of trust, whether it's fosters or adopters, making sure that your community understands that you are doing your best. Your goal is not to put unsafe dogs in the community. Your goal is to help your community and be open and communicative with your fosters so that we're all on the same team and they trust you and know that you're doing. And that, in my experience, makes a huge difference. And it's not, we still need the forms, but it's important.
So the biggest question, so Kelly and I teach apprenticeships to about 200 students a year who are trying to run foster programs. And probably the number one question we get is, how do you find fosters for adult cats and dogs that are either non-social or have behavioral challenges? And the assertion we get time and time again is there just aren't enough fosters. What is your response to that?
That is absolutely not true. We did some market research about a year ago and found that, okay, maybe show of hands. How many of you guys think that most people want to foster puppies and kittens? How about medical needs cats? Adult dogs? It's adult dogs. I was surprised when I saw it, and then I realized that traditionally, what foster care has meant is that a person takes home a dog, the organization kind of forgets about it because that animal's like safe, and that foster has that animal for like a year and a half. So when people think of foster, it seems like a huge, something that's a really kind of a hard thing to do. It takes a lot of time. You're going to get emotionally attached and stuff. We providing options for length of time, things like field trips and sleepovers. It lowers the bar for fostering, and it makes people really, really, really want to do it. You can get a lot of people who would not have thought that they could become a long-term foster. I was one of them. We started out as weekend fosters because we couldn't, didn't have time for full-time fostering. But once you get into it, you realize it's a lot easier than it seems. So people really do want to foster big dogs. They want to do it for short periods of time. And a lot of times when they do that, they realize they can do it for longer.
And just one other comment about short-term fostering and recruiting foster caregivers. We did a survey about 2 years ago, some of you may have responded to it, looking at short-term foster programs in the United States. And that was a huge way that short-term fosters were very, very likely to turn into long-term fosters or adopters. So think of your short-term foster program as a recruiting mechanism for those longer-term people.
And we provide a lot of marketing support for our fosters. And so we have some fosters that are in the triple digits of large breed dogs that they have fostered. And it's almost like they can take a large breed dog home and get it adopted 3 days later when everybody else thinks that's going to be a long-term foster. Yeah. It's really getting the information. When you take a dog home, you learn so much about that dog. You learn about their personality and what they're like in a home. And really, that is why our Dog Day Out program has been so successful and why it's growing so much, is just even those short-term fosters and being able to do a weekend field trip or a sleepover. We get so much information and really see that those dogs that really do so poorly in the shelter are completely different dogs in a home. And I think when we show that and we're able to give all of that information then to potential adopters and to put that in their bio and to showcase them, it gets them homes quicker. And then those fosters are also ready to turn around and foster again. One of the things we do is we have a segment that we do on Saturday mornings, 1 or 2 Saturdays a month on one of our local television stations. We always take foster dogs on those segments. Not dogs out of the shelter, we take fosters. And they're always like large breed dogs. It is a great way for the foster to showcase their dog, and it inevitably gets those dogs adopted quicker.
Thank you. Okay, so let's talk cats. I think one of the things I'm proudest about PAC is that in the last 2 years we have not euthanized one cat for behavioral reasons. And that's something I never thought was possible. We deal with a lot of hoarding. Some of you might get these too, hoarding cases with these indoor non-social cats who want to hide in a corner and don't show themselves very well. Sheila, you are a veterinary behaviorist. There's only a few of you in the country, so you actually have the background to say behaviorally, what can we do for cats by getting them out of the shelter and into foster homes? Like, is that important?
It's just as important for cats as it is for dogs, in that cats, obviously we all know, suffer from shelter stress too, and so many cats. One of my colleagues did a research project looking at cats who were displaying fear, aggression in the shelter, and I could talk in much detail about it, but the ultimate results of that project were that they learned that supposed fear aggression was really they didn't like the other cats in the environment, and so they got those cats out of that situation, and these cats were normal cats and were able to be happily adopted into homes and did wonderfully. And that was really powerful, and I had similar experiences bringing cats into my office and out of cages in the shelter. And we do need to think of our cats, and I also think when we think about short-term foster, the thought of doing short-term foster with cats for most people is, oh my gosh, we could never do that. But remember, we need to think of cats and dogs as individuals, and think about those cats in your shelter that are really rowdy, really playful, they're play-biting people, they have so much energy, they're really gregarious, they tend to stay for a long time because they don't do well in confinement. Those cats are potentially awesome options for short-term foster. So just because they're a cat doesn't mean none of them can have short-term foster. And we're actually funding a research project looking at short-term foster for cats, so we'll learn more about it.
Thank you. Kelly, so as the person that's teaching all these Rockstar foster coordinators, what's the biggest single mistake you see foster programs making right now?
The biggest mistake, I think, is the organization doesn't value foster as it does adoption. And if you think about it, foster care, there are some animals who can't even get to adoption without foster care. Neonatals, pets with behavioral issues. And organizations that are talking about foster care in their marketing as much as they're talking about adoption, and this is in any way, you could tell stories about pets in foster, talk about this pet is available for foster or adoption, just slip the word foster in there often. It really helps get your community used to the idea that fostering is normal, and it becomes something your community does. It is, I think to a lot of people, it's kind of a scary thought because they do kind of go back to that, I'll have this animal for, a year. But if they see other people in the community doing it and hear their stories, it can really do a lot to help. One of the things that probably the most common issue we have with, that our foster coordinators have had is having no access to the marketing. And you can't recruit fosters without marketing. And if you and the marketing are in sync, you can recruit a lot of fosters.
Teresa, at your shelter, if someone wants to foster, do they have to do a application, a background check, a home visit, and agree to a training? How does the process to foster an animal work?
And we call it a sign-up, not an application. So I think it's really important to, drop the judgment, let everyone that wants to help you. No, we don't do background checks and all that. We do support the fosters, so we do provide them with information and we provide them with all the supplies that they need. But certainly, I think just being open to any animal in the shelter is available for foster. Certainly, we're going to talk about the ones that need foster more, but if you're making space in your shelter by sending a pet to foster, that's great. That opens it up for another pet and saving a life. So everybody is available.
So for the smaller, and this is for any of you, but for the smaller groups, we have probably rescue groups who pull animals out of municipal shelters. I've heard the concern, well, if we send all of our animals to foster, then there's no animals in the organization for the public to see. And so our adopters come and they might not have the variety of animals. What is your response to that?
Marketing. One of the things that was absolutely brilliant that Kristen did during the behavioral foster study was she marketed the heck out of the pets in foster care. Completely the opposite of what we've traditionally done. Usually you market the pets in the shelter and then kind of ignore the ones in foster. What she did was brilliant because it was able to, especially those of us who were behavioral fosters, were able to, I think the length of time from foster to adoption was about 3 weeks. And we're talking about pets that had behavior issues in the shelter. So in the span of a year and a half, I could have had one dog and I had 16 because the marketing. And think about your best fosters or your most experienced fosters. Wouldn't it be awesome to times them by 16? And that's how you do it.
Yeah.
Sheila, Maddie's son made this amazing investment into foster care. I mean, really from making it a key initiative to supporting the apprenticeships and the programs we were doing in other studies. Why was it a priority of such a massive national organization that could make so many choices? Why did you guys decide to focus on foster care?
When I joined Maddie's Fund about 6 years ago, we had been planning to build Maddie's Center, which was going to be a really large facility in Pleasanton, California, where we were going to be able to offer what we considered to be ideal care for dogs and cats, and especially more challenged dogs and cats. And as we were going through the planning phases and really excited about how innovative this facility was, we realized that we were building the facility to try to make the enclosures be like homes. And we realized, why are we building this facility to look like homes? Why don't we invest heavily in foster care so that the animals are actually in homes, and we can use that money that we would spend on that building to invest in all of you, as opposed to a physical facility. And with the length of time that Maddie's Fund has been involved in this field, we've learned and we've learned and we've learned from all of you, and are all really excited to be moving into the future for our next phase, where that's the reality for our shelter pets.
Thank you. So where time is growing short, and I just want to touch on a couple of the other challenges that people face. Money, how do you pay for these programs? So I have at any time 1,000 pets in foster. How does an organization who's already resource strapped pay for all of this? Do they have to provide all the supplies and all of that? How does that work?
You want me to answer that? So we do things like kitten showers, and we don't do those things at the shelter. We do them at breweries. And we do it at places like that because people like to go there. And so it's really easy to fill an entire business with people who are interested in learning about foster. And the price of admission, not only does the brewery give discounts on the beers that evening, and sometimes they even give us some of the proceeds so that we can help buy supplies. But the price of admission is that they have to bring some supplies off of our wish list for our foster program. And we bring kittens for them to snuggle too. A lot of the kitten showers that we do will have little kittens that we can set out on the little tables, and it's a really cute thing. But we realize that go out into the community where people are and tell them what you need and what you're trying to achieve, and people will help you. And it's really easy to say, I need a case of this food, or I need these little warmy discs, or I need kitchen scales to weigh kittens. And when we put that out on social media, or we put that out in our kitten showers, people will buy all of them on the wish list and send them to us on Amazon. So we do really well with those kinds of events where you're out in the community asking for the community to get involved.
Cool. And I will say I've worked with a good number of organizations, some of which provided a lot of the supplies and some of which didn't have the money to really provide any of the supplies. And they were both, every organization has the same capacity to onboard new fosters. It was not a barrier if they weren't able to provide things. And when I was working with an organization that did provide the food, a lot of times the fosters would provide their own just to be nice. So it should not be a barrier to starting a program if you're not able to provide everything that, the supplies.
Sheila, you've been such a visionary for foster care and sort of looking forward. What do you see lying ahead for foster care in animal shelters?
What I see lying ahead is a place where our shelters are places for triage and places to bring animals in and assess what their needs are. And if there is a need that they need to be in the shelter for, that the shelter will benefit from that, they stay. But otherwise, the vast majority are either being adopted right away or going directly out. So the shelter is just a very temporary way station on the way to somewhere else where they will be much better suited in our foster homes to allow us to get to know them so that they can be happy.
I think in the last 100 years or so, we've found that humans in any type of institutionalization, it just doesn't work for us. Hospitals, orphanages, jails. And I think animal welfare is just like maybe 2 steps behind. I think what we'll see is a movement toward home-based care for animals, just like we're seeing with humans.
Do you think we'll see in the future, do you think we'll see subsidized fostering where we're actually paying a stipend to homes that will house the animals that tend to sit in the shelter system or decline?
Absolutely. I think that as we do start basing more care at home, the shelters are going to start saving a lot of money. So we will be able to kind of reallocate resources to where they need to be.
Okay, so one final question for each of you. What, if you have this audience of several hundred people here, all probably already making efforts towards foster, what is one thing you want them to walk away with knowing today?
I can start. The biggest thing I want you to walk away with, I think you've already heard, is that if you're struggling, there are lots of options available to you to get your program going. And whether it's talking to organizations that already have strong programs or attending a Maddie's apprenticeship, the support is out there and you can do it. You just have to have the passion and the commitment, and we'll all help you get there.
I would say that the thing that I would have you take away is that there are a lot more people than you realize that will help you. There are a lot more people in your communities that will foster animals for you. And I think it's just getting out there and finding new creative ways to engage the community, being involved in different things in the community, and normalizing, as Kelly said, talking about foster, just as we say foster or adoption. You just use that term all the time, and being able to really tap into your community to foster more animals.
I think probably, I think that we don't know right now how many fosters one community can grow. And I think that the number is way, way, way higher than we think it is. And I think that there are a lot more people out there who want to foster. We need to just ask them in the right ways and ask them often.
Thank you all so much. In closing, I'll say that you all meet resistance. We know you do. And that starting high volume foster care programs requires you be incredibly brave. And you all are doing that. But you will meet resistance, and when you meet resistance, what we do is we invite the people who say it's too expensive or we don't have time, we invite them to spend just one night in a shelter kennel to feel what that existence feels like. And even for some folks, just thinking about what that would be like can turn them around and help them understand why foster care is the future of animal welfare. Thank you all. Go enjoy your break, not lunch. Thanks so much.